The Last of Us 2 just released a few weeks ago, and within its short span of existence, it's managed to rile up the gaming community so bad that everyone's starting to forget that the real life world is slowly becoming like the world that we see in the games. A lot of people hate the game, we know that much. But I think a lot of people don't know why they really hate the game, except that everyone else hates the game. So I'd like to do my part and explain what I thought of the game and how I would fix it. Before I say anything, let me just get this out of the way. I don't care what Abby looks like. I don't care what Abby's gender is. I don't care about Abby in general. But we'll get to that. I'm just trying to look at Abby as a standalone character. And as a standalone character, she's pretty good. Her character improves from the beginning of the game towards the end. Her interactions with Liv are also somewhat refreshing. And her whole journey, the whole journey of Abby and Liv is strikingly similar to that of Joel and Ellie in part 1. The person who was once bad trying to redeem himself by doing good things and all that. I can see what they tried to do. Not only that, she is objectively and morally in the right. Her dad gets killed first, okay, by Joel. So that makes Joel the first aggressor in the entire storyline. So Abby taking revenge on Joel doesn't seem like that far-fetched of an idea. What's more, she continues to be a good person by sparing Ellie and Dina, despite knowing the fact that Ellie killed literally almost all of her friends. Almost all of her friends. She's not the worst person in the story by a mile. There are people much worse than her that are shown in the story. And yet, I feel this anger every time I think of her. I don't know why. Or maybe I do. It's because of this scene.
Joel, please get up!
That scene is just brutal, man. There's nothing poignant about it. There's nothing inspiring about it. It's just depressing. It's the biggest metaphor I could think of for what this game did to the franchise. It took something that is universally loved by everyone who liked the first game and beats it to death with a golf club, basically, in front of the fans by someone that nobody really asked for or even knew to ask for, I think. Joel in part 1 was morally wrong. Okay, he did something that is ultimately selfish, and yet we could sympathize with him. We understood where he was coming from. It's the move that any father would make. So that same thinking applies here, but in an inverse fashion. Despite being in the morally right, most people want Abby to just die. Not only that, but Abby doesn't show any kind of willingness to understand where Joel was coming from. Remember, she was just saved by Joel a few minutes ago before she decided to get the golf club out or whatever. So wouldn't it prompt some level of curiosity as to whether this guy was the bad guy that I thought or anything like that? No, she just beats him with a golf club. So with all this in mind, it's very easy to see why nobody really cared about her later on in the game, and you're forced to play as her basically. So for fixing this, it's very easy to just say remove Abby, she's not useful. But the problem with that type of thinking is that it's a creative hole. You need to think of something much more bigger and much more expectant to fill in that gap. So I'll work with Abby instead. It would be interesting if we had like an Abby and Ellie encounter, basically, where they both get kidnapped by, I guess, one of the Seraphites, like that scene with Yara and Abby. We can have them work with each other to escape, because otherwise they would die. They have to work. And then we can have them have a small chat before, going their separate ways. Of course, this is hoping that Abby doesn't say that she's trying to kill Joel to Ellie. That would be pretty awkward, but I'm hoping that she won't say it. I mean, dude, creative license and all that. This works because it introduces Abby as a character first, instead of the one that killed Joel, which would probably stick in most people's minds. By introducing as a character, we humanize her, because this is the first impression that most people will have of her, and that's the one that is most likely to stick with them later on in the game. Most badasses die in a pretty badass way. A good example for this is John Marston's death in Red Dead, where he basically walks out into the firing squad, gets shot at multiple times, but just before he gets shot, he somehow still manages to take down a few people with them. That is pretty badass. Even if the character isn't badass, there's still a lot of ways where you can make his death somewhat meaningful. A good example for this is Horatio's death in Watch Dogs 2. He wasn't particularly a badass, they didn't even do any character introduction on him, but his death was pretty insane. So he gets captured by the rival gang and they force him to divulge information, which he doesn't. So they stab him and they leave him bleeding out over the course of many hours until Marcus finds him and he, well, dies. Thinking back, I think that is pretty still badass, right? But Joel, the Joel that survives this, and then does this a few minutes later. That guy's a certified badass. In The Last of Us 1, we can see that Joel was a extremely paranoid kind of type. He was extremely vigilant and always on the lookout. A good example was where he met Henry, which is just a dude with his kid. And he immediately asked,
"How many are with you?"
Despite everyone, including the viewer, knowing that it's just some dude with his kid. For a person like that, and not to mention his brother Tommy, who's also credible in his own right, for them to walk into a house with basically what are strangers and completely lose their guard like that, that is pretty out of character for them. Sure, it's possible for him to mellow with age. You could make that argument that since he's been in a safe zone for a long time, he could have dropped his guard a lot better, but still he would have been pretty vigilant about it. To kill a character who's as badass and as careful as this in such a, I guess, disrespectful way is both a letdown to the viewer and it's also a tarnishing of Joel's character. Not only that, but if you take it from like a game director's perspective, like from a publisher's perspective, if you use a character in all the promotional videos like the trailers and then use him to show that your game is released with a meme, and then to kill him off like this within the first hour of the game, that's pretty annoying. Since I already mentioned that we're removing the golf club scene, I would like to propose an alternative scene to Joel's death. Yes, Joel is gonna die, I'm not changing that option. I would make it an ambush type of situation rather than just a group, ground and pound in there like their fancy Hilton suite or whatever. Abby could find all those tracks that she found and immediately spot Joel going on his patrol. She could then ambush him, which would then lead them to both have like a small scuffle. Meanwhile, the friends of Abby, or like Abby's friends, immediately realize that she has not been back for a while and start chasing after her, eventually finding her fighting up with Joel. From there on, you can have all the friends have their own golf club, I guess, and then basically beat him up. In his last moments, you can even have Joel grab Abby's leg and then switch on a grenade or something, so that in his death there is still some level of damage that he gave to the people who killed him. Abby of course survives, but it still leaves like a permanent damage on her body, which goes to show how much Joel is a badass, basically. Ellie's revenge story, that one that takes place at the end of the game, that is probably the worst presentation of any concept that I've seen in any game so far. It is so nihilistic, so pointless, so barren of any meaning that it almost single-handedly takes down the entire game. Let's recap for a bit. She has the most prominent figure of her life so far, basically her father, killed by some random woman in such a disgusting way while she's pinned down and forced to watch the entire thing. She then of course swears revenge and all that, I'll kill you, all that, and goes ahead to kill a lot of people who had nothing to do with any of her revenge story. She kills all of them in cold blood. And she is finally spared by the very person that her revenge is based upon. Taking this into account, she then goes back to a normal life, has a family, lives happily, but still that solidified hate doesn't leave her. That solidified pain doesn't leave her. And so she sets off again, determined for blood, determined to take this person down regardless of whatever came in her way. She finally finds this person and attacks them in a brutal fist fight and finally tells her to go. I used to think it was pretty stupid too. Like, the first reaction I had to the game was, wow, well, that was pointless. But the more I thought about it, the more I looked up things, I realized that maybe it's not so dumb after all. Let me explain with a story. In 2007, a mother lost a son. She had already lost her youngest to a car accident, so this news was devastating to her. The son in particular was killed by a stabbing by someone he played football with. Obviously, the mother was really angry and determined to watch the killer hang. The killer was, of course, promptly assigned the death sentence, but as the date grew closer and closer, the mother started having dreams of her son, asking her to forgive the killer. But the emotional impact was too great. She couldn't do it by herself, just like that. So the day of the execution arrives, and the killer is brought on to the stage or the podium where he will eventually be hung. He's sobbing, he's crying, like anyone would do. The mother, of course, sees this and doesn't do anything. In this particular country or in this particular law system, there's an option for the relatives of whoever was killed to go ahead and kick the chair from underneath the person that's being hanged. That's a privilege that they get, and it was offered to the mother. When the time came, the mother, of course, walks promptly to the stage and doesn't kick the chair. Instead, she slaps him really hard, really hard. But the very next second, she immediately asked the noose to be taken off of his neck. She officially pardoned the killer. This, of course, was allowed by the state, and the killer was then taken out. This was a real story. This is the story of Samre Alinjad, whose son Abdullah was killed by a man named Balal in Iran. And under Sharia law, she could officially pardon him from death. She stated that after she slapped Balal, she immediately felt all the vengeance leave her, which to me is a foreign concept and is probably a foreign concept to you, but it still happened in reality. We can see this similar pattern in Ellie. We can see her get traumatized by killing all of Abby's friends, and at the end, at the crucial moment, she eventually forgives Abby for whatever she has done and allows her to live. This is one of the many reasons why I don't have a problem with Ellie's choice. What I do have a problem with is the reasoning that they chose for Ellie's actions. So in the game, of course, just before Ellie kills Abby, she has this weird 2-second flashback of Joel playing a guitar. And apparently that was enough for her to stop. In what universe does the memory of a dead person, especially the dead person that the person that you're strangling killed, makes you want to forgive that person? If anything, with all the adrenaline rushing through her, she would have strangled even harder. Also, just to go back a bit, the whole reason that Ellie even fights Abby, remember, once she pulls him off of the whole pole thing, she is very much okay with just leaving. The only reason she even tried to fight was because she had a memory of Joel. So that memory contradicts this memory. So that's why I think it's stupid. Bleak and depressing stories like this aren't new. We've seen them before. A good example were the Far Cry games. It's still fun because it forces you, the player, to make the choice between embracing the monster that you've become, the monster that likes blood and wants to cause more pain, and resisting it, staying civil, staying the person that you were before you entered whatever crazy realm that the game threw you into. In Last of Us 2, it doesn't matter. You will still feel like shit. If you're the type of person to embrace the monster that you've become, you would be pretty angry by this ending because you weren't able to kill the one person that was mainly responsible, let alone all the other people. And if you're the person to resist it, stay civil, stay the person you were before, you would still be pretty annoyed because you weren't able to kill the one person that you would be justified in killing. She's the one who caused you pain, not all those other people that you killed for no reason. The game makes sure you know that. You will just have to live with the fact that you killed all those people for basically no reason. So you can see here, every single path sucks for you, the player. This one is pretty easy to fix. The concept lying underneath is pretty rock solid. It's very good writing. I would just change the reasoning for Ellie's forgiveness. Here's the new reason that I'm gonna provide. I'm gonna have Liv stumble out of the boat all week from all the days of torture that he had to endure along with Abby. Go ahead, pick up whatever instrument he had, maybe a knife, and just stab it into Ellie's gut. It's the most that he could do to protect the one person that he feels is important to him. Ellie, of course, the sudden pain causing her to move out, slaps Liv unconscious basically. But then it hits her. The moment the threat was gone, she realized what a person that she's become. She's become this monster that's basically just killing the mother figure of a kid whose entire family was destroyed. Of course, she doesn't know this, but the context of the situation is more than enough to provide her with the details she needs to come to this conclusion. Liv embodies the state of Abby as of now. The Abby that once beat Joel to death with a golf club no longer exists, just like how the Ellie that beat Nora to death with a pipe no longer exists. They're both dead, they have matured. So then, of course, Ellie forgives Abby and Ellie walks back to her old life where she can live vengeance free with Dina. Well, that is, of course, until some NPC shows up ready to take revenge because Ellie killed his cousin Danny or some shit. This ending is obviously not as depressing as the true ending, but I feel like it provides the sense of hope that the first game provided, which this game desperately needs. Also, I think it more clearly drives home the concept that the team were going for. I'll tell you again, it's a really good concept. It's just very poorly executed. Ultimately, The Last of Us is still a very gorgeous looking game with amazing gameplay mechanics that incrementally improve upon the first mechanics and has dialogue and cutscenes that seamlessly transition from gameplay to cutscene so elegantly that it almost becomes an interactive movie at that point. Despite that, it's unfortunately overshadowed by the bleak and depressing story that leaves you with zero satisfaction by the end of it. It's a shame, really. I thought the direction that Naughty Dog took with this game was pretty creative and bold, even. Ultimately, is the game bad? No, not by a long shot. I initially hated the game, then I liked it, then I hated it again, then I liked it, and then I realized that no game that I've played has ever made me go back and forth like this. It takes a lot of courage to do what Naughty Dog did in this game. It has 7 years of hype building up to it, and it's very easy for Naughty Dog to just play it safe for the fan and just rake in the money. Story is very crucial to games like this. Of course, it's basically an interactive movie. While it is poorly presented and it is at points poorly written, the overall underlying concept is pretty rock solid and very interesting to see. Plus, this game has obviously all the other elements of a game done to perfection. The gameplay is amazing. The whole animations are beautiful, not to mention the amazing graphics. All the cutscenes, like I said, flow very seamlessly from one to the next. You never know when a cutscene is coming. It even has well-developed characters. Remember, Abby's story, when you take it out of the context of the golf scene, is pretty interesting. This game has done a great job on all of those, so it still makes for a great gaming experience, but the story is just polarizing enough that for most people, they might not like it, and you can't blame them entirely for that. So how would you guys fix the story? Do you think the changes that I made were pretty dumb? Well, whatever it is, let me know down in the comments. But for now, thanks for watching.